In the mist-shrouded halls of Blackthorn Manor, a weekend of theatrical revelry turns deadly when actress Clara Vernon is stabbed through the heart on stage. A cursed dagger, the crest of vengeance at the center of the crime, Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of blackmail, hidden motives, and dark secrets among a cast of suspects. A pompous theater magnate, a gossiping heiress, a secretive doctor, a nervous playwright, and the elegant Lady Beatrice. As clues blue silk, lavender, oil, and a cryptic letter emerge from the shadows, Poirot reveals a killer driven by love and obsession, proving that even the grandest stage cannot conceal the truth. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot stood before the oval mirror in his London flat, his small deft hands adjusting the silk tie with a precision that bordered on reverence. The knot, a perfect Windsor, sat precisely at the center of his starched collar, and he permitted himself a slight nod of approval. His moustache, that magnificent emblem of his fastidious nature, gleamed with the faintest sheen of wax, each curl symmetrical and unyielding. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, casting a soft glow on the mahogany furniture, and Poirot's grey eyes, sharp as a falcon's, surveyed his reflection with satisfaction. Order and method, these were the pillars of his existence, and he would allow no deviation, not even in the smallest detail. On the polished table beside him lay an envelope, its cream paper embossed with the crest of Blackthorn Manor. The invitation had arrived the previous evening, delivered by a courier whose urgency suggested more than a mere social summons. Poirot picked it up, his fingers tracing the elegant script of Lady Beatrice Ashford, a woman whose acquaintance he had made years ago during a delicate matter involving a stolen sapphire brooch. The memory brought a faint smile to his lips. Lady Beatrice had been a formidable ally, her wit as sharp as her sense of propriety. Her letter, however, carried an undercurrent of something less assured, a tremor in the otherwise graceful penmanship. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," it began, "your presence is requested at Blackthorn Manor for a weekend gathering to honor the legacy of my late husband, Sir Reginald Ashford. A select company will join us, and I have planned a touch of mystery, a diversion in the spirit of Reginald's love for the dramatic. Your little grey cells, I am certain, will find it most stimulating. I await your arrival with anticipation. Yours sincerely, Beatrice Ashford." A touch of mystery. Poirot's eyes gleamed at the phrase. He had long since retired from the clamour of public life, but the lure of a puzzle, even one framed as entertainment, was irresistible. Lady Beatrice's words hinted at more than a parlour game. There was a weight to them, a suggestion of secrets veiled beneath the veneer of hospitality. Poirot folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, his mind already turning over possibilities. A mystery, he thought, is never truly staged. It is summoned by the currents of human nature, and those currents run deep. He packed his valise with care, selecting a wardrobe suited to the chill of the Cotswolds in autumn. A woolen suit in charcoal grey, a selection of crisp shirts, and, of course, his trusted moustache wax, secured in a silver tin. The train to Blackthorn departed at noon, and Poirot, ever punctual, arrived at Paddington Station with time to spare. The platform bustled with travellers, their voices a cacophony of farewells and hurried instructions, but Poirot stood apart, a figure of serene composure amidst the chaos. His cane tapped lightly on the ground as he boarded the first-class carriage. Settling into a seat by the window, the journey was pleasant, the countryside unfurling in a tapestry of gold and russet. Poirot sipped a cup of tea, served by a porter with a nervous smile, and considered the nature of his destination. Blackthorn Manor was a name familiar to him, not only from Lady Beatrice's tales, but from its reputation in society circles. A Gothic pile of stone and ivy, it had been Sir Reginald's pride, a monument to his wealth and his eccentricities. A collector of rare manuscripts and artifacts, Sir Reginald had been a man of theatrical flair, his life a performance as grand as any staged in London's West End. His death, 2 years prior, had been sudden, a heart attack, the papers said, though whispers of foul play had lingered like smoke. As the train neared Blackthorn, the landscape grew wilder, the hills cloaked in mist that seemed to cling to the earth. The station was little more than a platform, its sign weathered but legible. A chauffeur in a smart livery awaited Poirot, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Ashford has sent the car." Poirot nodded, climbing into the Bentley, its leather seats exuding a faint scent of polish. The drive to the manor wound through narrow lanes, past hedgerows and ancient oaks, until the house itself came into view. Blackthorn Manor stood like a sentinel against the grey sky, its towers piercing the mist. The stone facade was weathered but imposing, its windows glinting like eyes that had seen too much. Ivy crawled up the walls, softening the severity of the architecture, and the lawn, though meticulously kept, bore the faint frost of early autumn. Poirot stepped from the car, his breath visible in the crisp air, and felt a prickle of anticipation. This was no ordinary country house, he sensed. It was a stage, and he, Hercule Poirot, was about to enter its drama. Lady Beatrice greeted him. At the entrance, her silver hair swept into a chignon that spoke of timeless elegance. She was a woman in her late 50s, her face lined with the grace of experience rather than age. Her eyes, a piercing blue, held a warmth that did not entirely mask a flicker of unease. "Hercule, you are a vision of precision, as always," she said, her voice rich with the cadence of the aristocracy. She took his arm, leading him into the grand hall, where a fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and wax, and the walls were adorned with portraits of Ashford's past, their stern gazers. Following Poirot as he crossed the polished floor. "You are too kind, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "It is a pleasure to be in your company once more. This minaret is magnifique, a fitting tribute to Sir Reginald's legacy." Beatrice's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Yes, Reginald loved this place. He poured his heart into it, and I hope this weekend will do him justice. She gestured toward a side table where a decanter of sherry gleamed in the firelight. "Come, let me introduce you to the others." The drawing room was a study in opulence, its walls lined with damask, and its furniture a blend of Georgian solidity and Victorian excess. The guests, 5 in number, were already assembled, their voices a low hum of conversation that ceased. As Poirot entered, Lady Beatrice made the introductions with practiced ease, her hand resting lightly on Poirot's arm. "Sir Lionel Drake," she began, indicating a man whose bulk seemed to strain the seams of his tailored suit. Sir Lionel was in his 60s, his face florid and his moustache a rival to Poirot's, though less disciplined. A theatre magnate, he carried himself with the arrogance of one accustomed to applause. "A pleasure, Poirot," he boomed, his handshake firm to the point of aggression. "Heard you're a sleuth of some repute. Hope you're not here to spoil our fun." Poirot inclined his head. "I am here, Sir Lionel, to enjoy the hospitality of our hostess. But the little grey cells, they are always alert." Next was Miss Clara Vernon, a young actress whose beauty was as sharp as a blade. Her dark hair was cut in a fashionable bob, and her green eyes sparkled with a mix of charm and calculation. She offered Poirot a smile that was more performance than warmth. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and melodic, "I've heard tales of your brilliance. I trust you'll find our little gathering diverting." Dr. Ernest Holt was a contrast, his demeanor reserved to the point of reticence. A physician in his 40s, he had a lean frame and eyes that seemed to see too much. His hands, Poirot noted, were steady but bore the faint stains of iodine, a mark of his profession. "An honor, sir," Holt said quietly, his bow stiff. Poirot sensed a man who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, a widowed heiress, was a woman of indeterminate age, her face softened by powder and her voice by years of practiced gossip. She wore a lavender gown that whispered of wealth, and her eyes darted about the room, cataloguing every detail. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, clasping his hand. "I've read all about your cases. How thrilling to meet you." The final guest was Mr. Felix Marwood, a playwright whose youth and nervous energy set him apart. His suit was ill-fitting, and his hands fidgeted with a pencil, as though he were perpetually on the verge of writing or erasing something. Monsieur Poirot," he stammered, "I'm just here to help with the entertainment. Not much of a detective myself." Poirot smiled, his eyes taking in each guest with the precision of a watchmaker. "Each of you," he said, "brings a unique flavor to this gathering. I look forward to the unfolding of this mystery Lady Beatrice has promised." Dinner was served in the dining room, a cavernous space lit by a chandelier that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The table was set with silver and crystal, and the meal roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a claret of exceptional vintage was a testament to Lady Beatrice's hospitality. Yet the conversation was strained, like a violin strung too tightly. Sir Lionel dominated, regaling the table with tales of his theatrical triumphs, each anecdote more grandiose than the last. "My production of The Tempest," he declared, "brought London to its feet. Clara here was in it, weren't you, my dear?" Clara's smile was brittle. "A minor role, Sir Lionel. You hardly gave me a chance to shine." Her tone was light, but the barb was unmistakable. Sir Lionel's face reddened, and he reached for his glass. Lavinia Gray steered the conversation to safer ground, chattering about society scandals and the latest fashions from Paris. Poirot listened, his fork poised, noting the undercurrents. Felix Marwood ate little, his eyes darting to Lavinia with a frequency that suggested more than casual interest. Dr. Holt, meanwhile, was silent, his gaze fixed on his plate, though Poirot caught him glancing at Lady Beatrice when she mentioned Sir Reginald's collection of manuscripts. "Reginald was so proud of them," she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. "He believed they held secrets worth more than gold." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Secrets, madame, of what nature?" Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening. On her napkin, oh, just his fanciful notions. He loved to imagine hidden codes, ancient curses. "You know how collectors are." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "The mind of a collector is a labyrinth, no." As the meal drew to a close, Lady Beatrice rose, her presence commanding silence. "My friends," she said, "tomorrow evening we shall gather in the Manners Theatre for a performance unlike any other. A mystery play, crafted in Reginald's honor, with a twist that I believe will captivate you all." Her eyes met Poirot's, and he saw in them a plea, though for what, He could not yet discern. The guests murmured their excitement, though Poirot sensed a ripple of unease. Clara's smile was too bright, Felix's hands too restless, Sir laugh was too loud, and Dr. Holt's silence too heavy. Lavinia alone seemed genuinely eager, her eyes sparkling with the prospect of drama. Poirot sipped his coffee, his mind a whirl of observations. The stage was set, the players assembled. But what, he wondered, was the true nature of the performance to come? After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing-room, where a pianist played softly, and brandy was served. Poirot declined the drink, preferring to keep his faculties sharp. He engaged Lavinia in conversation, her chatter a goldmine of indiscretions. "Clara's star is rising," she confided, "but she's made enemies. Sir Lionel lost a fortune on her last show, and he's not one to forgive." Poirot filed the information away, his eyes drifting to Felix, who stood alone by the window. Staring into the darkness, approaching the playwright, Poirot said, "Monsieur Marwood, you are the architect of tomorrow's play. Felix started, nearly dropping his glass. "Why, yes, in a manner of speaking. Lady Beatrice gave me guidelines. It's meant to be a surprise, even to me." His voice trembled, and Poirot noted the sheen of sweat on his brow. "Most intriguing, Poirot," said, "a play with secrets, even from its creator. Tell me, what is its theme?" Felix hesitated. "It's a murder mystery. A detective unravels a crime, but the clues are unconventional. I can't say more." He excused himself abruptly, leaving Poirot to ponder the weight of his unease. As the evening drew to a close, Lady Beatrice took Poirot aside. "Hercule," she said softly, "I trust you will enjoy the weekend, but I must confess, I feel a certain disquiet. Reginald's death left shadows, and I fear they linger still." Her eyes searched his, and Poirot saw in them a vulnerability. She rarely allowed. "Madame," he said, "you have invited Hercule Poirot. If there are shadows, I shall bring them into the light." She smiled, but it was a fragile thing, like porcelain on the verge of cracking. "Thank you, Hercule. I knew I could rely on you." Poirot retired to his room, a spacious chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the misty hills. He sat at the writing desk, his notebook open, and began to record his observations. The guests, the manner, the promise of a mystery, all were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work. He thought of Lady Beatrice's words, of Sir Reginald's manuscripts, of Felix's fear and Clara's sharpness. Each guest, he knew, carried a secret, and secrets were the threads from which murders were woven. As he closed his notebook, a distant sound caught his ear creak, like a footstep on old wood. He rose, his cane in hand, and stepped to the window. The lawn was bathed in moonlight, the mist swirling like a living thing. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure moving near the theatre wing, but it vanished into the shadows. He murmured, "The play, it seems, has already begun." He returned to his bed, but sleep did not come easily. The air of Blackthorn Manor was thick with anticipation, and Poirot knew that whatever mystery Lady Beatrice had planned, it was merely the curtain rising on a far greater drama. The little grey cells hummed, and Hercule Poirot, detective extraordinaire, prepared to take his place in the spotlight. Chapter 2. The stage is set. The morning sun struggled through the heavy mist that clung to Blackthorn Manor, casting a pallid light over the frost-dusted lawns. Hercule Poirot, ever an early riser, had already completed his morning routine with the precision of a metronome. His breakfast, a single boiled egg, a slice of toast, and a cup of café au lait had been consumed in the solitude of his room, where he could reflect without the distraction of idle chatter. Now, dressed in a tweed suit that balanced elegance with the chill of the Cotswolds, he set out to explore the manor's grounds, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the gravel path. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and Poirot's breath formed small clouds as he walked. His destination was the manor's private theatre, a structure Lady Beatrice had mentioned with pride during the previous evening's dinner. If a mystery was to unfold as her invitation had promised, the theatre would surely be its stage. Poirot's grey eyes, keen and unyielding, scanned the surrounding, the manicured hedges and the distant silhouette of a gardener, his figure half obscured by the fog. The manor itself loomed behind, its Gothic spires piercing the mist, like the teeth of some ancient beast. The theatre was a separate wing, connected to the main house by a covered walkway lined with stained glass windows. Poirot paused to admire the craftsmanship, each pane depicting scenes of medieval revelry nights, minstrels, and masked figures dancing under a moonlit sky. Most evocative, he murmured, his mind already weaving connections between the imagery and the promised touch of mystery. The door to the theatre was unlocked, its heavy oak creaking as he entered. Inside, the space was a marvel of opulence, a testament to Sir Reginald Ashford's theatrical passions. The auditorium was intimate, with no more than 50 seats, their crimson velvet cushions gleaming under the soft glow of a chandelier. The stage was framed by a proscenium arch, its gilt carvings depicting cherubs and muses, and the curtain, a deep burgundy, hung with the weight of anticipation. Poirot climbed the steps to the stage, his cane echoing in the empty space, and surveyed the area with the meticulousness of an archaeologist at a dig. The boards were polished, but faint. Scuff marks suggested recent activity. Poirot knelt, his gloved hand tracing the grain of the wood, and his attention was drawn to a trapdoor at the stage's center. Its edges were flush, nearly invisible to the casual observer, but Poirot's eye was anything but casual. He pressed, gently, and the trapdoor yielded with a soft click, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "a stage within a stage. Most intriguing." He descended carefully, his small frame navigating the ladder with surprising agility. The room below was cramped, its walls lined with ropes and pulleys, the machinery of theatrical illusion. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light from above, and Poirot noted footprints in the grime fresh, with the distinct tread of a man's shoe. Someone, he mused, has been here recently, but for what purpose? He examined the space. Further, finding a small crate containing props, a candelabrum, a velvet cloak, and a wooden sword, its paint chipped. Nothing, at first glance, suggested malice, yet Poirot's instincts prickled. He ascended, closing the trapdoor with care, and made a mental note to revisit it later as he emerged. He found Felix Marwood on the stage, pacing with the frenetic energy of a man pursued by his own thoughts. The young playwright's shirt was rumpled, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. He started at Poirot's appearance, clutching a sheaf of papers. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect. That is, I was just rehearsing." Poirot's smile was disarming, but his eyes missed nothing. "Rehearsing, Monsieur Marwood, alone in this splendid theatre. Tell me, what is the nature of this play that so occupies you?" Felix hesitated, his fingers tightening on the papers. "It's a mystery, as Lady Beatrice said. I wrote it, but she gave me specific instructions. The details, well, they're meant to surprise the audience. Even I don't know the full shape of it." His voice wavered, and Poirot noted the tremor in his hands. "Curio," Poirot said, his tone light. "A playwright who does not know his own play. And this trapdoor," he gestured to the stage, "it plays a role, perhaps." Felix's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, that. Just a theatrical device, for dramatic entrances, you know. Nothing more." He laughed, a sound too high and too brief. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but his mind was a whirl of calculations. Felix's nervousness was not merely the anxiety of a young artist, it was the fear of a man who knew more than he wished to. "Reveal, I look forward to the performance," Monsieur Poirot said, bowing slightly. "I am certain it will be illuminating." He left Felix to his pacing and returned to the manor, where the guests were gathering for luncheon in the conservatory. The glass-walled room overlooked the gardens, and the table was set with a spread of cold meats, cheeses, and a salad of winter greens. The mood was lighter than the previous evening, but Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension, like a current. Beneath the still lake, Sir Lionel Drake was in fine form, his voice carrying over the clink of cutlery. "This theatre of Beatrice's is a gem," he declared, slicing into a piece of ham. Reginald had an eye for spectacle. Pity he never let me produce anything here. I'd have filled the seats with London's finest. Clara Vernon, seated across from him, raised an eyebrow. "I doubt it, Sir Lionel. Your last production was so dull it could have put a statue to sleep." Her tone was teasing, but the barb landed, and Sir Lionel's jowls quivered with suppressed indignation. Lavinia grey-tittered, her fan fluttering like a bird's wing. "Oh, Clara, you are wicked. But I must say, I'm eager for tonight's performance. A mystery play, what fun." Dr. Ernest Holt, as silent as ever, picked at his food, his eyes flickering to Clara with a pintacy that Poirot noted. Lady Beatrice, presiding at the head of the table, steered the conversation to neutral ground, describing the theatre's history. "Reginald built it 20 years ago," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "He loved the idea of a private stage, where he could experiment without the critics' prying eyes." Poirot seized the opportunity. "And this play, Madame, it is in his spirit, a mystery, you said. Does it draw from his collection, perhaps? His manuscripts, his artifacts?" Beatrice's smile was guarded. In a way, Hercule, Reginald, was fond of weaving his treasures into his entertainments. But the play is Felix's creation, with a few suggestions from me. Poirot's eyes met hers, and he saw the same unease he had noted the previous evening. "Suggestions," he repeated softly. "Most interesting." After luncheon, Poirot excused himself, citing a need for fresh air, and returned to the theatre. The stage was empty now, Felix having vanished, but the air held a faint scent of cigarette smoke, though none of the guests had smoked at lunch. Poirot's gaze fell on the curtain, its heavy folds concealing the wings. He stepped behind it, finding a narrow passage lined with ropes and sandbags. A small table held a script, its pages marked with hurried annotations in Felix's hand. One note caught Poirot's eye, cue, blackout and sure timing, precise. He frowned, his mind turning over the implications. Timing, in a murder mystery, was everything. He returned to the auditorium, seating himself in the front row, and closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work. The theatre was a microcosm of the manor, a place where illusion and reality blurred. The trapdoor, the footprints, Felix's fear, Clara's sharpness, Sir Lionel's blusterel were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot sensed they were connected by more than Lady Beatrice's promised diversion. He thought of her words about Reginald's manuscripts, their secrets worth more than gold. Could one of those secrets be the key to the mystery? As the afternoon waned, the guests began to gather in the theatre, their voices echoing with anticipation. Lady Beatrice appeared, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk, her composure restored. "Hercule," she said, taking the seat beside him, "I trust you've enjoyed exploring the manor." "Immensely," Madame Poirot replied. "This theatre, it is a masterpiece, and the play, I am certain, will be equally so." Her smile was tight. "I hope so. It is important to me that Reginald's memory is honored." The lights dimmed, and the chatter ceased. The curtain rose, revealing Felix as a detective in a stylized Victorian setting, his voice tremulous but clear. The play was a whirl of dialogue and movement, its plot centered on a fictional murder in a grand house. Clara played the victim's sister, her performance electric, her eyes flashing with a fire that held the audience captive. Poirot watched, his attention divided between the stage and the guests around him. Sir Lionel shifted restlessly, Lavinia's fan fluttered, and Dr. Holt's hands were clenched in his lap as the first act neared its climax. A blackout plunged the theatre into darkness. The audience gasped, expecting a theatrical flourish. But then came a scream, sharp and real, cutting through the silence like a blade. The lights flickered on, and the curtain rose to reveal Clara Vernon, sprawled on the stage, a dagger protruding from her chest. Her eyes were open, unseeing, and a pool of blood spread beneath her. The theatre erupted in chaos. Dr. Holt leapt to his feet, rushing to the stage, while Lavinia screamed, her fan falling to the floor. Sir Lionel bellowed for order, and Felix stood frozen, his face ashen. Lady Beatrice gripped Poirot's arm, her voice a whisper. "Hercule, this was not in the script." Poirot rose, his demeanor calm amidst the storm. "Nan, madame," he said, his eyes fixed on the stage, "this is no longer a play, it is murder." Chapter 3. The curtain falls. The air in Blackthorn Manor's theatre grew thick with panic. A cacophony of gasps and cries rising like a discordant symphony. Clara Vernon lay motionless on the stage, her green eyes staring blankly at the gilded ceiling, the dagger in her chest, a grotesque centerpiece to the scene. The crimson pool beneath her glistened under the stage lights, its edges creeping toward the polished boards. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the chaos, his small frame an island of calm amidst the tempest. His grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, took in every detail, the angle of the dagger, the stillness of Clara's form, the horrified faces of the guests. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the drama, it has become all too real." Lady Beatrice, her face pale as the moon, gripped the armrest of her seat, her knuckles white. "Hercule," she whispered, "this cannot be. It was meant to be a performance, nothing more." Her voice trembled, but Poirot noted the steel beneath it, a resolve that belied her shock. He patted her hand gently, his mind already racing. "With possibilities, courage, madame, we shall uncover the truth." Dr. Ernest Holt was the first to act, his physician's instincts overriding the collective stupor. He climbed onto the stage, kneeling beside Clara, his fingers probing for a pulse. The auditorium held its breath as he worked, his face grim. After a moment, he looked up, his eyes meeting Poirot's. "She's dead," he said, his voice low but steady. Stabbed through the heart. Death was instantaneous. A wail broke from Lavinia Gray, who clutched at Sir Lionel Drake's arm as if it were a lifeline. "Murder," she cried, her voice shrill. "We're all in danger." Sir Lionel, his florid face, now ashen, attempted to soothe her, though his own hands trembled. Now, Lavinia, let's not jump to conclusions," he blustered, but his eyes darted to the exits. Betraying his unease, Felix Marwood remained rooted backstage. His script crumpled in his hands, his face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen," he stammered, his voice barely audible. It was a prop knife in the script. A prop. His eyes, wild with panic, sought Poirot's, as if the detective could undo the horror before them. Poirot stepped onto the stage, his cane tapping a deliberate rhythm, each sound a counterpoint to the chaos. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice cutting through the din with quiet authority. "We must remain calm. A crime has been committed, and Hercule Poirot will not permit it to go unanswered. Madame Beatrice, I request that no one leave this theatre until we have established the facts." Lady Beatrice nodded, rising with an effort. "Of course, Hercule. I'll have the staff secure the doors." She signalled to a footman, who hurried to comply, his face as pale as his mistress's. The guests, though shaken, obeyed command, settling uneasily into their seats or clustering in small groups, their whispers a low hum of fear and suspicion. Poirot approached Clara's body, his movements precise, his eyes scanning every detail. The dagger was no theatrical prop. Its blade was steel, its hilt adorned with an intricate cresta lion rampant, entwined with a serpent. He recognized it immediately, for he had seen its likeness in a portrait in the Manners Hall, part of Sir Reginald Ashford's collection of artifacts. "Curio," he murmured, his gloved hand hovering over the weapon but not touching it. "This is no ordinary blade. It carries history and perhaps intent." He turned to Dr. Holt, who lingered nearby, his medical bag open at his feet. "Monsieur le Docteur, you are certain of the cause of death?" Poirot's tone was polite, but his eyes were piercing. Holt nodded, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. The blade pierced the heart directly. "There are no other wounds, no signs of a struggle." She didn't have time to react. His voice was clinical, but Poirot noted a faint tremor in his fingers, a detail that did not escape the little grey cells. Poirot's gaze shifted to the trapdoor he had discovered that morning. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beneath the stage. He knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and peered into the gap. The footprints he had noted earlier were still there, but now, in the dust, he saw a fresh smudge, as if something or someone had passed through recently. "The trapdoor," he said softly. "It is a silent player in this tragedy, n'est-ce pas?" He stood, addressing the group. "We must ascertain the sequence of events. Monsieur you wrote this play. Tell me what was to happen in this scene." Felix, still clutching his script, stepped forward, his voice unsteady. It was the climax of the first act. Clara's character was to discover a clue letter on the stage. There was a blackout, and during it, a prop knife was to be placed in her hand, symbolizing her intent to confront the villain. When the lights returned, she was to collapse dramatically, unharmed. But this, he gestured helplessly at the body. "This is real. Someone changed the knife." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And who had access to the props, monsieur?" Felix swallowed. I prepared them myself, but they were left backstage. Anyone could have tampered with them. The dagger wasn't even in the prop list, it's not mine. Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice. Madame, this dagger, it is from your husband's collection. She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the weapon. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's the crest of vengeance, one of Reginald's prized possessions. It was kept in a locked case in the library. I don't know how it got here. Locked, you say? Poirot's tone was gentle, but his mind was racing. And who has the key? Only I do, she said, her hand touching the chain at her neck, where a small key hung. It's always with me. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He turned his attention to the stage, examining the area around Clara's body. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn fabric or displaced props, suggesting the killer had struck with precision. The blackout, he reasoned, had provided the perfect cover, but it required intimate knowledge of the play's timing and the theater's layout. His eyes returned to the trapdoor, then to the guests, each of whom watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Mes amis, he said, addressing the group once more. We are in the presence of a murderer. This was no accident, no error of the stage. Someone among us replaced the prop with a deadly weapon, and they used the darkness to strike. I ask that you remain here while I conduct a preliminary examination. The truth it will not hide from. Hercule Poirot. He beckoned Dr. Holt to assist, requesting a more detailed inspection of the body without disturbing the scene. Holt confirmed that Clara had been healthy, with no signs of sedation or prior injury. The dagger, he noted, had been driven with force, suggesting a strong hand, though not necessarily a man's. Poirot examined Clara's hands, finding no defensive wounds, only a faint smudge of ink on her fingers, as if she had been writing. Shortly before her death, he then inspected the backstage area where the prop table stood. A wooden knife, painted to resemble steel, lay discarded among the clutter, its presence confirming Felix's claim. But the crest of vengeance, with its ornate hilt, was an anomaly, its weight and sharpness unmistakable. Poirot's gaze swept the wings, noting a discarded cigarette butt, its tip still warm. Someone was here, he murmured, and they were careless. Returning to the auditorium, he addressed the guests, who had grown restless. I must ask each of you where you were during the blackout. Sir Lionel, the theatre magnate, straightened, his voice gruff. In my seat, front row, second from the aisle. Didn't move an inch. Poirot nodded, his eyes moving to Lavinia. Madame Grey. Lavinia fanned herself, her voice tremulous. I was in my seat as well, next to Sir Lionel. But I did step out briefly, just before the blackout, to fetch my shawl from the cloakroom. I was back in time for the scream. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. The cloakroom, madame. It is some distance from the theatre, Nan. Her cheeks flushed. I was quick. I didn't want to miss the performance. And you, Monsieur le Docteur? Poirot turned to Holt. I was in my seat, third row, Holt said, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding Poirot's. I watched the entire act. Felix, still backstage, spoke up unprompted. I was in the wings, managing the props. I had to cue the blackout. I didn't see anything honest, Lady Beatrice, her composure fraying, added, I was beside you, Hercule, the entire time. You can vouch for me. Indeed, Madame Poirot said, though his mind noted the timing of the blackout mere seconds, yet enough for a practiced hand to act. He turned to the footman, who had remained by the door. And you, monsieur? Did anyone enter or leave the theatre during the performance? The footman, a young man named Thomas, shook his head. No, sir. I was at the main entrance. No one. Past me, Poirot's lips pursed. The theatre had other exits, he knew, including one near the stage that led to the covered walkway. He made a mental note to inspect it later. For now, he addressed the group. The police must be summoned, but until they arrive, I shall take charge. This theatre is now a crime scene, and I ask that you touch nothing. The truth, it is like a delicate flower, it must not be trampled. Lady Beatrice nodded, dispatching Thomas to telephone the local constabulary. The guests, subdued, remained in the auditorium, their eyes darting between Clara's body and Poirot's calm figure. He returned to the stage, his mind a whirl of details, the dagger, the trapdoor, the cigarette butt, the ink on Clara's fingers. Each was a thread in the tapestry of murder, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving them together. As he stood over Clara's body, he felt a pang of sorrow. She had been vibrant, sharp, a woman whose fire had burned brightly. But fire, he knew, drew enemies as well as admirers. Someone in this theatre had extinguished that flame, and Poirot vowed to uncover them. The curtain has fallen, he murmured, but the play, it is far from over. Chapter 4. The guests under scrutiny. The theatre at Blackthorn Manor, once a haven of opulence and anticipation, now bore the grim weight of tragedy. The chandelier's light cast long shadows across the crimson seats and Clara Vernon's body. Still, on the stage, was a stark reminder of the crime that had shattered the evening. Hercule Poirot stood in the centre of the auditorium, his small frame commanding the attention of the shaken guests. His grey eyes, sharp as polished steel, moved from face to face, each one a canvas of fear, guilt, or calculation. The air was thick with the scent of dust and fear, and the distant wail of a police siren signalled the approaching end of their isolation. But Poirot knew that the truth, like a rare gem, required careful extraction, and he would not wait for the authorities to begin his work. "Mise, Amos," he said, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the murmurs like a knife through silk. "A murder has been committed, and the killer is among us. Hercule Poirot does not make such a statement lightly. Each of you must now account for your actions during the performance, particularly in the moments of the blackout. The truth, it hides in the details, and I shall uncover it." Lady Beatrice, seated in the front row, her emerald gown now seeming out of place amidst the grim scene, nodded solemnly. "Hercule, we will cooperate fully. Ask what you will." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the tightness in her jaw, a sign of strain she could not entirely conceal. He began with Sir Lionel Drake, whose bulk seemed to fill the space around him. The theatre magnate stood near the aisle, his moustache quivering with indignation. Sir Lionel Poirot said, "You stated you were in your seat, second from the aisle, during the blackout. Is this correct?" "Absolutely, Sir Lionel," boomed, his voice echoing in the theatre. "I didn't budge. Watched the whole blasted play until that scream, of course." He folded his arms, as if daring Poirot to challenge him. Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes were unyielding. "And you saw nothing unusual? No movement, no shadow, during those moments of darkness?" Sir Lionel hesitated, his bluster faltering. "It was pitch black, man. Couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. But I heard nothing odd until Clara screamed." "Mercy," Poirot said, his tone neutral. He turned to Mrs. Lavinia Gray, who sat fanning herself vigorously, her lavender gown crumpled from her earlier distress. "Madame Gray, You mentioned you stepped out to fetch a shawl, yet the cloakroom, it is some distance from the theatre. Can you clarify the timing of your absence? Lavinia's fan paused, and her eyes darted to the side. Well, I realized I was chilly just before the blackout. I slipped out, found my shawl, and was back in my seat before the lights returned. It was only a moment. Her voice was bright, but Poirot noted the slight flush in her cheeks, a telltale sign of unease. A moment, Poirot repeated softly, and where is this shawl now, madame? Lavinia blinked, her hand fluttering to her shoulder. Oh, I must have left it in the cloakroom after all. In the shock, you see, I forgot to bring it back. Her laugh was brittle, and Poirot's mind registered the inconsistency. The cloakroom was at least 2 minutes' walk from the theatre, a journey difficult to complete in the brief span of the blackout. He moved to Dr. Ernest Holt, who stood near the stage, his medical bag at his feet. The physician's face was composed, but his hands, clasped behind his back, betrayed a faint tremor. Monsieur le Docteur, Poirot said, you were in the 3rd row, watching the performance. Did you notice anything unusual before or during the blackout? Holt's eyes met Poirot's briefly before dropping to the floor. Nothing out of the ordinary. The play was engaging, and I was focused on it. The blackout came as a surprise, but I assumed it was part of the performance. Then the scream. He trailed off, his voice tight. And your medical bag, Poirot said, gesturing to the leather case. It was with you in the auditorium. No, Holt admitted. I left it backstage, near the prop table, in case of any theatrical emergencies. I retrieved it after Clara was found. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Backstage, you say, most convenient. And you saw no one near your bag during the performance? Holt shook his head, his expression guarded. No one. I was in my seat. Poirot turned to Felix Marwood, who lingered in the wings, his face pale and his hands clutching the crumpled script as if it were a lifeline. Monsieur Marwood, you were backstage, managing the props and cueing the blackout. You were certain. The dagger was not in your inventory. Felix nodded vigorously. I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. The script called for a wooden knife, painted silver. I checked it myself before the performance. That thing, he gestured, toward the crest of vengeance. It wasn't there. Someone must have switched it. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. And during the blackout, you were where, precisely? At the lighting board, in the wings, Felix said, his voice trembling. I had to flip the switch for the blackout. It lasted only 10 seconds, exactly as rehearsed. I didn't see anyone near the stage. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the responses. Each guest had an alibi, yet each was flimsy, riddled with gaps that the little grey cells would probe. He turned to Lady Beatrice, who had remained silent, her eyes fixed on Clara's body. Madame, you were beside me during the performance. But tell me, who else had access to the theatre before tonight? The staff, perhaps. Beatrice's fingers tightened on the key at her neck. The theatre was locked until this morning, when Felix needed to rehearse. The staff Thomas, the footman, and Mrs. Ellis. The housekeeper helped prepare the space, but they were under strict instructions not to touch the props. And the crest of vengeance, Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing. It was in the library, locked away, yet it found its way here. How, madame? Beatrice's lips parted, but no words came. After a moment, she said, I don't know, Hercule. The case was secure. I checked it myself yesterday. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he did not press further. Instead, he addressed the group. The police will soon arrive, and they will conduct their own inquiries. But until then, I ask that you remain here. I shall examine the theatre further. For the clues, they are like breadcrumbs. They lead to the truth. He returned to the stage, his cane tapping softly as he circled Clara's body. The dagger, with its lion and serpent crest, was the key, he was certain. Its presence was no accident. It was a deliberate choice, a message perhaps, or a necessity born of opportunity. He examined the trapdoor again, noting that the smudge he had seen earlier was now joined by a faint scratch, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. The trapdoor, he murmured, it is the silent witness to this crime. He moved backstage, where the prop tables stood in disarray. The wooden knife Felix had mentioned was there, its paint chipped but harmless. Nearby, the cigarette butt he had noticed earlier lay in a corner, its brand unfamiliar, foreign make, perhaps, or one not commonly smoked in England. Poirot pocketed it carefully, wrapping it in a handkerchief. He then inspected the lighting board, a simple mechanism with a single switch for the blackout. It was unmarked, but a faint smudge of grease on the lever caught his eye. Curious, he said, his mind turning over the possibility of sabotage. The police arrived shortly after. A local inspector named Hargreaves, a man with a weathered face and a nonsense demeanor. He listened to Poirot's account, his eyes narrowing at the mention of the crest of vengeance. That's a queer business, he said, scratching his chin. We'll take statements and secure the scene. But you, Monsieur Poirot, you've a reputation. I'd welcome your thoughts. Poirot inclined his head. I am at your service, Inspector, but I shall work in my own way with the little grey cells. The truth, it is already here, waiting to be seen. While the police began their work, photographing the scene and interviewing the staff, Poirot retreated to a corner of the auditorium, his notebook open. He sketched a diagram of the theatre, marking the positions of the guests, the trapdoor, and the exits. He listed the clues: the dagger, the trapdoor, the cigarette butt, the ink on Clara's fingers, the grease on the lighting switch. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He approached Thomas, the footman, who stood nervously by the door. Monsieur Thomas, Poirot said, you saw no one enter or leave during the performance. But before, when the theatre was prepared, did you notice anything unusual? A stranger, perhaps, or an item out of place? Thomas shook his head, his eyes wide. No, sir. Just Mr. Marwood and Mrs. Ellis, setting up the props and seats. Everything seemed normal, and the cigarette butt, Poirot said, producing the handkerchief. Do you recognize this brand? Thomas peered at it, his brow furrowing. Can't say I do, sir. None of the staff smoke, far as I know. Lady Beatrice doesn't allow it indoors. Poirot nodded, dismissing the young man. He then sought out Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a face like weathered granite. She confirmed Thomas's account, adding that she had cleaned the theatre herself that morning and seen nothing amiss. Except, she said, hesitating, there was a strange smell in the wings, like oil or machine grease. I thought it was from the pulleys. Grease, Poirot repeated, his mind returning to the smudge on the lighting switch. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. As the police continued their work, Poirot returned to the guests, who sat in uneasy silence. He observed their interactions. Sir Lionel's forced joviality, Lavinia's nervous chatter, Holt's guarded silence, Felix's palpable fear, and Beatrice's strained composure. Each, he knew, held a secret, and one of those secrets had led to murder. He approached Lady Beatrice, who stood apart, her eyes fixed on the stage. "Madame," he said softly, "this dagger, the crest of vengeance, it is more than a relic. It carries a story." Beatrice's lips tightened. "It was Reginald's obsession," she said. "He believed it was cursed, tied to a medieval feud. He kept it locked away, not just for its value, but for what it represented. I never thought." Her voice broke, and she turned away. Poirot placed a hand on her arm. "The truth, madame, it will come. But it requires patience and the courage to face what lies behind the curtain." As the police prepared to remove Clara's body, Poirot's mind was a whirl of details. The dagger, the trapdoor, the grease, the cigarette. The ink all pointed to a killer who was both bold and meticulous. But who among them had the motive, the means, and the opportunity? The little grey cells were at work, and Poirot knew that. The next act of this drama would reveal more than any script could conceal. Chapter 5. The manuscript's secret. The mist that had cloaked Blackthorn Manor since Hercule Poirot's arrival seemed to thicken as night deepened, wrapping the Gothic estate in a shroud of secrecy. The theatre, now cordoned off by Inspector Hargreaves and his men, stood silent. Its opulent interior a stark contrast to the grim task of the police photographer, whose flashes illuminated Clara Vernon's body before it was gently covered and removed. Poirot stood at the edge of the auditorium, his small frame silhouetted against the flickering light, his grey eyes fixed on the stage where the drama of death had unfolded. The little grey cells were restless, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle, the crest of vengeance, the trapdoor, the cigarette butt, the grease smudge, and the ink on Clara's fingers. Each was a clue, but the heart of the mystery, he sensed, lay beyond the theatre's velvet curtains. The guests had been escorted to the drawing room, where a fire crackled fitfully, casting shadows on the damask walls. Their faces, lit by the glow, were a study in contrasts. Sir Lionel Drake's bluster had given way to a sullen brooding, his moustache drooping like a wilted flower. Mrs. Lavinia Gray clutched a glass of brandy, her eyes darting as if expecting the killer to emerge from the shadows. Dr. Ernest Holt sat apart, his hands folded tightly, his silence a wall of reserve. Felix Marwood paced near the window, his nervous energy unabated. And Lady Beatrice, regal despite her pallor, presided over the group with a composure that Poirot found both admirable and suspect. The police, under Hargreaves' direction, were taking statements from the staff, leaving Poirot free to pursue his own inquiries. He approached Lady Beatrice, who stood by the mantel, her fingers tracing the edge of a porcelain figurine. "Madame," he said, his voice soft but insistent, "the crest of vengeance. It is no ordinary artifact. You spoke of Sir Reginald's obsession with it, of its history. I must see his collection, the manuscripts, the records, the dagger. It was taken from the library. I wish to understand how and why." Beatrice's eyes met his, and for a moment, Poirot saw a flicker of fear, quickly masked. "Of course, Hercule," she said, her voice steady. "The library is locked, but I'll take you there myself. Reginald's collection was his pride, but also his burden." She touched the key at her neck, a small silver object that gleamed in the firelight, and led Poirot from the room. The library was a cavernous space, its walls lined with oak shelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling. The air was heavy with the scent of leather and old paper, and a single lamp cast a golden glow over the room. A glass case stood in the center, its lock intact but empty, the velvet lining bearing the faint imprint of the dagger that had killed Clara. Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting the meticulous order of the shelves. Each book and manuscript labelled with Sir Reginald's precise hand. A desk in the corner held a blotter, an inkwell, and a stack of papers, their edges yellowed with age. Beatrice unlocked a drawer in the desk, withdrawing a leather-bound journal. "This was Reginald's," she said, handing it to Poirot. "He documented his collection here, especially the Crest of Vengeance. He believed it held a secret, something beyond its monetary value." Poirot opened the journal, its pages filled with Reginald's elegant script. He read silently, his lips pursed as he absorbed the details. The Crest of Vengeance, according to the journal, was a medieval relic, forged for a noble family embroiled in a blood feud. The lion and serpent crest symbolized vengeance, and legend claimed the dagger was cursed, bringing ruin to those who wielded it with malice. Reginald had acquired it at great cost, convinced it was linked to a lost manuscript, a codex that contained coded messages about the feud's resolution. "Most intriguing," Poirot murmured, his fingers tracing a sketch of the dagger. "And this codex, Madame, it is here." Beatrice shook her head. "Reginald never found it. He spent years searching, corresponding with scholars, but it remained a mystery. The dagger was his only tangible link to the story." Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, this dagger, locked away, found its way to the stage. "The lock, it is undisturbed. Yes," Beatrice said, her voice barely audible. "I checked the case yesterday. The dagger was there, secure." Poirot examined the glass case, his gloved hand testing the lock. It was a sturdy mechanism, showing no signs of tampering, no scratches, no forced entry. "Curio," he said. "Either the key was used, or there is another." "Madame, who else might have access to this room?" "No one," Beatrice insisted. "The staff are forbidden to enter without my permission. Only I hold the key." She hesitated, then added, "Though Reginald kept a spare years ago, I assumed it was lost after his death." Poirot's mind seized on the detail. A spare key, unaccounted for, was a crack in the facade of certainty. He turned to the shelves, scanning the titles. Among the manuscripts was a volume on medieval weaponry, its pages marked with Reginald's notes. One passage caught Poirot's eye, a reference to the dagger's curse, claiming it sang in the hands of the vengeful. He closed the book, his thoughts racing. The dagger's presence on the stage was no accident. It was a deliberate choice, steeped in symbolism. Leaving the library, Poirot requested to speak with the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, who was waiting in the hall. The stout woman's face was grim, her hands clasped tightly. "Madame Ellis," Poirot said, "you mentioned a smell of grease in the theatre's wings. Have you noticed anything similar in the library, perhaps near the case?" Mrs. Ellis frowned, thinking. "Not grease, sir, but there was a faint smell of lavender oil near the case yesterday when I dusted the room. I thought it was Lady Beatrice's perfume." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Lavender oil, you say? Most interesting. And you saw no one else in the library?" "No, sir, just Lady Beatrice, when she checked the case." Thanking her, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the guests remained under the watchful eye of a constable. He observed them closely, noting Sir Lionel's restless fidgeting, Lavinia's forced chatter with Felix, and Holt's continued silence. Felix, catching Poirot's gaze, approached nervously. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything?" I can't believe this happened." Clara was. He trailed off, his eyes glistening. Clara was what, monsieur? Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. Felix swallowed. She was. Difficult, sometimes. But she didn't deserve this. Poirot nodded, his mind returning to the ink on Clara's fingers. Monsieur Marwood, did Mademoiselle Vernon write often? Letters, perhaps, or notes? Felix blinked, surprised. I don't know. She was always scribbling something lines ideas for roles. She kept a notebook, I think, in her room. Poirot made a mental note to inspect Clara's belongings. He then approached Lavinia, who was recounting a society scandal to a disinterested Sir Lionel. Madame Gray, he said, interrupting her, you mentioned enemies of Mademoiselle Vernon. Can you be more specific? Lavinia's fan fluttered. Oh, well, Clara was ambitious, you see. She stepped on toes. Sir Lionel, for instance, lost a fortune when her last play flopped. And there were rumors about her and Dr. Holt. Nothing concrete, mind you, but people talk. Sir Lionel snorted. Nonsense. Clara was a liability, but I didn't kill her. I'm a businessman, not a brute. Holt, overhearing, stiffened, but said nothing. Poirot's eyes lingered on him, noting the tension in his posture. Monsieur le Docteur, he said, you treated Mademoiselle Vernon as a patient, oui. Were there any complications in her care? Holt's jaw tightened. She was in good health. Our interactions were professional. I resent the implication. Poirot inclined his head. I imply nothing, monsieur. I seek only the truth. As the police continued their work, Poirot retreated to a quiet corner, his notebook open. He sketched the library case, the dagger's crest, and a timeline of the blackout. The lavender oil, the spare key, the ink, the greaseall, were threads in a tapestry of deceit. The crest of vengeance, with its cursed history, suggested a motive rooted in the past, yet Clara's death was immediate, personal. Someone had planned this murder with care, using the play as a perfect disguise. He approached Inspector Hargreaves, who was reviewing statements. Inspector Poirot said, I recommend a search of Mademoiselle Vernon's room. There may be a notebook or letters that shed light on her final hours. Hargreaves nodded. Good idea, Monsieur Poirot. We'll get to it. Anything else? The dagger, Poirot said. It is the key. Its history, its removal from the library, these are not accidents. And the trapdoor in the stage, examine it closely. It may hold more secrets than we know. As the inspector moved to organize the search, Poirot's gaze returned to the guests. One of them, he was certain, had unlocked the case, taken the dagger, and struck in the darkness. But why Clara? And why now? The little grey cells hummed, and Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The manuscript's secret was a clue, but the true motive lay in the hearts of those around him, hidden behind their masks of grief and fear. Chapter 6. The playwright's fear the night had deepened over Blackthorn Manor, the mist pressing against the windows like a living thing, eager to witness the unfolding tragedy. The drawing room, where the guests had been confined under the watchful eye of a young constable, was a cauldron of unease. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a ruddy glow over the faces of Sir Lionel Drake, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, Dr. Ernest Holt, Felix Marwood, and Lady Beatrice Ashford. Each sat in their own pocket of silence or forced conversation, their eyes flickering with suspicion or dread. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of calm, stood near the doorway, his notebook tucked into his pocket, his grey eyes absorbing every nuance of the scene. The police, led by Inspector Hargreaves, was still in the theatre, cataloguing evidence. While a team had been dispatched to search Clara Vernon's room for the notebook Felix had mentioned, Poirot's mind was a whirl of details, the crest of vengeance, its cursed history detailed in Sir Reginald's journal, the trapdoor's fresh smudge and scratch, the cigarette butt with its foreign brand, the grease on the lighting switch, the lavender oil near the library case, and the ink on Clara's fingers. Each clue was a thread, but the pattern remained, elusive, hidden behind the masks the guests wore. He sensed that the key to the murder lay not only in the physical evidence, but in the human heart, its passions, its fears, its secrets. And of all the guests, Felix Marwood, the nervous playwright, seemed the most burdened by fear. Poirot approached Felix, who stood by the window, his hands twisting the crumpled script as if it were a lifeline. The young man's face was pale, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness, and his fingers trembled with a restlessness that Poirot found telling. "Monsieur Marwood," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority, "you are troubled, n'est-ce pas? The death of Mademoiselle Vernon has shaken you deeply. But there is more to your distress, I think. Will you share it?" With Hercule Poirot, Felix started, his eyes darting to the other guests before returning to Poirot. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. It's awful, that's all. Clara, dead on my stage, in my play." His voice cracked, and he looked away, out into the misty night. Poirot's smile was gentle, but his gaze was unyielding. "Your play, monsieur, was the stage for a murder, but not of your designer, so you say. Yet you know more than you have told. The little grey cells, they sense the weight of a secret. Speak, and let us lighten that burden." Felix's shoulders sagged, and for a moment Poirot thought he might collapse. He glanced at the others, Sir Lionel, engrossed in a muttered conversation with Lavinia, Holt, staring into the fire, Beatrice, watching them both with an unreadable expression, and then leaned closer to Poirot, his voice a whisper. "Clara, she was blackmailing me," he confessed, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "She knew something about me, something that could ruin my career. I didn't kill her, I swear, but I was afraid she'd tell everyone." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, encouraging Felix to continue. The playwright's voice dropped lower still. I borrowed a scene for the play from an obscure French drama I found in a bookshop. It wasn't published, just a manuscript, but Clara recognized it. She'd studied in Paris, you see, and she knew the original. She threatened to expose me as a plagiarist unless I paid her. I gave her what I could, but she wanted more, always more. "Most interesting," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "And this manuscript, it is here, in the manor." Felix shook his head. "No, I left it in London. But Clara had a copy of the scene in her notebook. She showed it to me, said she'd send it to the papers if I didn't comply." Poirot's mind seized on the detail. The notebook, then, was more than a collection of Clara's musings. It was evidence, a motive. For murder? And when did she last make this threat, monsieur? "Yesterday," Felix admitted, his voice barely audible. "After dinner, in the corridor. She was cruel about it, laughing. I begged her to stop, but she just walked away." Pure nodded, his thoughts racing. Clara's blackmail was a thread that could tie her death to any of the guests, but Felix's fear suggested he was a victim, not a perpetrator. Or was he? The little grey cells cautioned against hasty conclusions. "Merci, Monsieur Marwood," Poirot said. "You have been most candid. Remain here and say nothing of this to the others." He moved away, his cane tapping softly on the parquet floor, and approached Inspector Hargreaves, who had just returned from the theatre. The inspector's face was grim, his notebook filled with scribbled notes. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "we've found something in Miss Vernon's room. You were right about the notebook. It's with her things, locked in a small case. We're bringing it down now." "Excellent," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "And the theatre? Any further discoveries?" Hargreaves nodded. "The trapdoor's hinges were recently oiled fresh, like you said. And we found a bit of fabric caught on a nail down there. Blue silk, looks like, doesn't match anything Miss Vernon was wearing." Poirot's mind flashed to the guests. Attire: Lady Beatrice's emerald gown, Lavinia's lavender, Sir Lionel's dark suit, none were blue silk. But Clara had worn a sapphire dress in the play, a costume, perhaps, that could explain the fabric. Or was it from another source? "Most intriguing," he said. "I should like to see this notebook, Inspector." The constable returned, carrying a small leather case, its lock forced open. Inside was a notebook, its pages filled with Clara's elegant script. Poirot donned his gloves and flipped through it, his eyes scanning the entries. There were notes on her roles, sketches of costumes, and, as Felix had said, a copied scene from a French play, marked with her annotations. But there was more: a list of names, including Felix's, with sums of money beside them. Beside Felix's name was a note: plagiarism £500, or exposure. Other names included Sir Lionel, failed production, £2,000 owed, and Dr. Holt, confidential matter, £300. Poirot's lips pursed. "Blackmail, indeed," he murmured. Mademoiselle Vernon was a woman of many secrets. He handed the notebook to Hargreaves, who raised an eyebrow. "This is motive, all right," the inspector said. She was squeezing half the room. "We," Poirot agreed, "but we must be cautious. The notebook tells us what she did, but not who acted against her." He returned to the drawing room, his mind turning over the new evidence. The blue silk was a puzzle. None of the guests' attire matched, but the theatre's costumes warranted investigation. He approached Lady Beatrice, who was now seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Madame," he said, "the costumes for the play, they were prepared by whom?" Beatrice frowned, her fingers tightening. "Felix chose them, with my approval. They're stored in the theatre's wardrobe room, near the wings." Clara's dress was blue silk, part of the play's design. Poirot nodded, his suspicions confirmed. "And this wardrobe room, it is accessible during the performance?" "Yes," Beatrice said. "It's unlocked for the actors to change quickly." But only Felix and Clara were backstage during the play. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The wardrobe room, the trapdoor, the dagger all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the theatre's layout. He turned his attention to Dr. Holt, who had moved to a corner, his medical bag now at his side. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said, approaching. "The notebook of Mademoiselle Vernon mentions a confidential matter with you. Will you enlighten me?" Holt's face darkened, his hands clenching. "That's private," he snapped. "Clara was my patient. Anything she wrote is speculation." Poirot's smile was disarming. "Speculation, perhaps, but dangerous. Blackmail is a motive for murder, Nan. If you wish to clear your name, candor is advisable." Holt hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "She claimed I mishandled a case years ago, before I came to Blackthorn. It was nonsense, but she threatened to spread rumors. I paid her to keep quiet." Poirot noted the doctor's tension, the way his eyes avoided the others. And this payment, it was recent. Last month, Holt admitted. I thought it was over. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the doctor's motive alongside Felix's. He then approached Sir Lionel, who was nursing a brandy, his face flushed. Sir Lionel, Poirot said, the notebook suggests Mademoiselle Vernon held a debt over a failed production. Is this true? Sir Lionel's moustache bristled. That chit. Yes, she cost me a fortune when her last show tanked. Said I owed her for lost opportunities. I told her to go to blazes. And did you pay her? Poirot asked, his tone mild. Not a penny. Sir Lionel roared, then lowered his voice. Well, I offered a small sum to shut her up, but she wanted more, always more. Poirot moved to Lavinia, who was listening intently, her fan still. Madame Gray, you knew of Clara's enemies. Did you know of her blackmail? Lavinia's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. I heard rumors, Monsieur Poirot. Clara was ambitious. She made enemies, but I didn't know specifics. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the quickness of her response. Was she hiding something, or merely eager to distance herself from scandal? He turned to Beatrice, who had remained silent. Madame, did you know of Mademoiselle Vernon's activities? Beatrice's lips tightened. I suspected she was manipulative. Reginald warned me about her years ago, but I had no proof. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. Clara's blackmail had ensnared Felix, Holt, and Sir Lionel, and perhaps others. The blue silk, the trapdoor, the dagger all suggested a killer who moved with precision. Using the play as a perfect alibi, he returned to the theatre with Hargreaves, examining the wardrobe room. The blue silk dress Clara had worn was there, but no other blue fabric was found. The scrap from the trapdoor, then, was an anomaly, a clue to the killer's presence. As he stood in the wings, Poirot's thoughts returned to Felix's fear. The playwright's confession was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole. The little grey cells hummed, sensing that the truth lay just beyond reach, hidden in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor. The play, he murmured, was but a mask. The real drama is in the motives, and they are many. Chapter 7. A hidden motive. The night at Blackthorn Manor stretched on, its silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old house and the distant murmur of the police as they concluded their initial work in the theatre. The guests, still confined to the drawing room under the watchful eye of a constable, were a tableau of frayed nerves and guarded glances. The fire had been stoked anew, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung over the room. Hercule Poirot, his small frame poised near the doorway, observed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker, his grey eyes cataloguing every gesture, every flicker of expression. The little grey cells were at work, weaving together the threads of evidence. Clara Vernon's blackmail, the crest of vengeance, the trapdoor's smudge, the blue silk scrap, the cigarette butt, the grease on the lighting switch, and the lavender oil in the library. Each clue was a note in a complex symphony, and Poirot was determined to conduct it to its crescendo. The notebook found in Clara's room had revealed her as a blackmailer, extorting Felix Marwood for plagiarism, Sir Lionel Drake for a failed production, and Dr. Ernest Holt for a supposed medical indiscretion. Yet Poirot sensed that the motive for her murder was deeper, perhaps tied to the manor itself, to Sir Reginald's legacy, or to the mysterious crest of vengeance. The dagger, with its cursed history, was no random choice. It was a symbol, a key to a truth buried in the shadows of Blackthorn. Poirot's gaze settled on the guests, each a potential player in this deadly drama, and he resolved to probe further, to uncover the hidden motive that had driven one of them to kill. He began with Sir Lionel Drake, whose bluster had subsided into a brooding silence. The theatre magnate sat heavily in an armchair, his brandy glass empty, his moustache drooping like a flag at half-mast. Poirot approached, his cane tapping softly on the parquet floor. "Sir Lionel," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "You have told me of your dispute with Mademoiselle Vernon, of the financial loss she caused you. But there is more, I think. The notebook suggests she demanded a significant sum. Did she hold something else over you, something beyond money?" Sir Lionel's face reddened, his eyes narrowing. "What are you implying, Poirot? That I'd stoop to murder over a few pounds? I told you I offered her a settlement to shut her up, but she was greedy, wanted thousands. I refused, and that's the end of it." Poirot's smile was disarming, but his gaze was piercing. "And yet, Sir Lionel, you were at Blackthorn weeks ago, were you not? Inspecting the theatre for Lady Beatrice's renovations. You would have seen the trapdoor, the stage mechanisms. Perhaps you saw an opportunity." Sir Lionel's jowls quivered. "Preposterous. I was here to advise on lighting, curtains, business matters. I didn't go poking around trapdoors. And I certainly didn't kill that girl." His voice rose, drawing the attention of the others. But Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, the way his hands clenched the armrests. "Mercy," Poirot said, moving away. He turned to Dr. Holt, who sat apart, his medical bag at his feet, his face a mask of restraint. The physician's silence had been a constant throughout the evening, but Poirot sensed a storm beneath it. "Monsieur le Docteur," he said, "Clara Vernon's notebook mentioned a confidential matter involving you. You claim it was a false accusation, but blackmail thrives on truth, or the fear of it. What did she know?" Holt's eyes flicked up, cold and guarded. "I told you, it was nonsense. A patient from years ago, a case she twisted to suit her purposes. I paid her once to avoid scandal, but I refused her further demands. I had nothing to do with her death." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "And yet your medical bag was backstage, where the dagger was placed. A scalpel, perhaps, could be mistaken for a stage prop. Did you examine the props, Monsieur Holt's?" Jaw tightened. "I left my bag there, in case of emergencies, as I said. I didn't touch the props. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." Poirot nodded, his mind noting the doctor's defensiveness. He moved to Mrs. Lavinia Gray, who was engaged in a hushed conversation with Felix Marwood, her fan fluttering like a nervous bird. "Madame Gray," Poirot said, interrupting, "you have spoken of Clara's enemies, of her ambition. Did you know of her blackmail before tonight? Perhaps she approached you as well." Lavinia's fan paused, her eyes widening. "Me? Oh, no, Monsieur Poirot. I was never one of her targets. I heard rumors, of course. Clara was always stirring up trouble, but I had no personal dealings with her." Her voice was too bright, her smile too quick, and Poirot's little grey cells registered the possibility of a lie. "And yet," he said, "you were quick to leave the theatre during the performance, to fetch a shawl you did not retrieve. What kept you, madame?" Lavinia flushed, her fan resuming its frantic motion. "I told you, I was chilly. I got lost in the corridors, that's all. This house is a maze." Poirot's gaze lingered, but he did not press further. Instead, he approached Felix, who stood nearby, his eyes red-rimmed from strain. "Monsieur Marwood," Poirot said softly. You have confessed to Clara's blackmail over your plagiarism. But there is more, I think. You were backward stage. You knew the trapdoor, the timing of the blackout. Did you see anything or anyone during those crucial seconds? Felix shook his head, his voice trembling. I told you, I was at the lighting. Bored. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. I swear, I didn't touch that dagger. His hands twisted the script, tearing a page, and Poirot noted the desperation in his eyes. Calm yourself, monsieur, Poirot said. The truth, it will protect the innocent, but it requires courage. He turned to Lady Beatrice, who had moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the misty night. Madame, he said, the crest of vengeance was your husband's. Treasure, locked away by your key, yet it was used to kill. Tell me, did Clara ever speak of the dagger, or of Sir Reginald's collection? Beatrice's fingers tightened on the window ledge. She was curious about the collection, she admitted. Reginald showed her the dagger once, years ago, when she visited. She was fascinated by its history, its curse. But I never thought she'd... Her voice trailed off, and Poirot saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. Curio, he murmured. And the spare key to the library case, the one Sir Reginald kept, it had been found. Beatrice shook her head. I searched. After his death, it was gone. I assumed it was lost in his study, or perhaps stolen by a servant long since dismissed. Poirot's mind seized on the possibility. A stolen key, a hidden motive, a killer who knew the manor's secrets. He excused himself, seeking out Inspector Hargreaves, who was reviewing the evidence in the hall. Inspector Poirot said, The wardrobe room, have you examined the costumes thoroughly? The blue silk scrap from the trapdoor, it may belong to a costume not worn tonight. Hargreaves nodded. We checked. The blue silk doesn't match Clara's dress or any costume. In the wardrobe. It's odd, though fine quality, like something from a lady's gown, not a prop. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the library, have you searched for the spare key? We're still looking, Hargreaves said. The studies, mess papers, everywhere. But we found something else in Clara's room. A letter, half-written, addressed to L. It mentions a meeting in the theatre before the performance. Something about settling accounts. Poirot's heart quickened. L, he repeated. Lionel, Lavinia, or another, unknown. Show me this letter, Inspector. The letter, written in Clara's elegant hand, was brief but damning. L, we must meet before the play. The theatre, 7 p.m., you know what's at stake. Settle the account, or I'll tell all. The ink matched the smudge on Clara's fingers, confirming she had written it shortly before her death. Poirot returned to the drawing room, his mind racing. The letter suggested Clara had arranged a confrontation, perhaps with her killer. He studied the guests anew. Sir Lionel, whose temper could mask a deeper grudge. Holt, whose medical bag held tools of precision. Lavinia, whose absence during the blackout was suspect. Felix, whose fear was palpable. And Beatrice, whose connection to the dagger was undeniable. The blue silk, the letter, the dagger all pointed to a killer who had planned meticulously. Using the play as a perfect cover, he approached the constable, requesting a private word with Thomas, the footman, who had been stationed at the theatres. Main entrance. Monsieur Thomas, Poirot said, you saw no one enter or leave during the performance. But before, when the guests arrived, did you notice anyone lingering near the wardrobe room or the stage? Thomas frowned, thinking, Not exactly, sir. But I did see Mrs. Gray near the walkway to the theatre before the play started. She was adjusting her shawl or something like it. I thought she was just fussing with her dress. Poirot's eyebrows rose. A shawl, you say? Of what colour? Blue, sir, Thomas said. Silk, I think. She tucked it away quick when she saw me. Poirot's mind whirred. Blue silk, like the scrap in the trapdoor. Lavinia's story of fetching a shawl was unravelling, and the letter to L took on new significance. He thanked Thomas and returned to the drawing room, his gaze settling on Lavinia. She was chatting with Felix, her fan fluttering, but her eyes were wary. Watching Poirot's approach, Madame Gray, he said, his voice soft but firm. A word, if you please. The shawl you mentioned, blue silk, was it not? Lavinia fan froze, her face spalling. I don't recall. I told you, I left it in the cloakroom. Poirot's smile was gentle, but his eyes were relentless. The truth, madame, is like a spotlight. It reveals all, and I believe you have more to tell. As the night wore on, Poirot felt the pieces of the puzzle drawing closer together. The hidden motive, he sensed, was not just blackmail, but something deeper, tied to the manor's secrets and the crest of vengeance. The little grey cells hummed, and Poirot knew that the next revelation would bring him closer to the killer's identity. Chapter 8. The final act. The drawing room at Blackthorn Manor was a crucible of tension. Its opulent furnishings, a stark contrast to the grim atmosphere that had settled over the guests. The fire, now a mere flicker, cast long shadows that danced across the damask walls, mirroring the unease in the hearts of those present. Hercule Poirot stood near the centre of the room, his small frame radiating an authority that silenced the murmurs of Sir Lionel Drake, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, Dr. Ernest Holt, Felix Marwood, and Lady Beatrice Ashford. The police, under Inspector Hargreaves, had retreated to the theatre to finalise their evidence collection, leaving Poirot to orchestrate the denouement of this deadly drama. His grey eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved from face to face, each a canvas of secrets waiting to be unveiled. The little grey cells had been at work, weaving together the clues, the crest of vengeance, the trapdoor's smudge and blue silk scrap, the cigarette butt, the grease on the lighting switch, the lavender oil Clara's blackmail notebook, and the letter to L. The puzzle was nearly complete, and Poirot was ready to raise the curtain on the truth. Miss Amos, he began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy silence like a spotlight through darkness. We have witnessed a tragedy, a murder most foul, staged with the precision of a theatrical masterpiece. Mademoiselle Clara Vernon lies dead, struck down by the crest of vengeance, a dagger of history and curse. But this was no accident, no error of the stage. It was a crime planned with care, executed in the darkness of a blackout, and concealed within the illusion of a play. Hercule Poirot has seen through the illusion, and now the truth shall be revealed. The guests stirred, their eyes fixed on him, some with fear, others with defiance. Lady Beatrice, seated near the fire, clutched the key at her neck, her face pale but composed. Sir Lionel's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his bluster replaced by a wary silence. Lavinia's fan lay still in her lap, her lips parted as if to speak but held back by dread. Dr. Holt's gaze was steady, but his fingers twitched, betraying his unease. Felix Marwood, standing by the window, looked as if he might bolt, his script a tattered relic in his hands. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping a deliberate rhythm. Let us begin with the facts, he said. Clara Vernon was stabbed during the blackout, a mere 10 seconds of darkness, with a dagger from Sir Reginald's collection. The crest of vengeance, locked in the library case, was taken by someone with access or a key. The trapdoor beneath the stage, recently oiled, bore a smudge and a scrap of blue silk, suggesting the killer's path. A cigarette butt of a foreign brand was found backstage, and grease marked the lighting switch. Lavender oil scented the library case, and Clara's notebook revealed her as a blackmailer, extorting Monsieur Marwood, Sir Lionel, and Monsieur le Docteur Holt. A letter to L spoke of a meeting before the play, a settling of accounts. These are the threads, and now we weave them together. He turned to Felix, whose face was ashen. Monsieur Marwood, you confessed to Clara's blackmail over your plagiarism. You were backstage, at the lighting board, during the blackout. You knew the trapdoor, the timing. Yet your fear, it is genuine, Nan. You did not kill her, but you saw something, perhaps. Felix shook his head, his voice trembling. I told you, it was dark. I was at the switch, I swear. I didn't see anyone. Poirot nodded, moving to Sir Lionel. Sir Lionel, your dispute with Clara was financial, a loss of thousands. You visited the theatre weeks ago, inspecting its mechanisms. The trapdoor, it was familiar to you. Sir Lionel's face reddened. I told you, I was there for business. I didn't touch that blasted trapdoor, and I didn't kill her. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Holt. Monsieur le Docteur, your medical bag was backstage, near the props. Clara's notebook mentioned a confidential matter. You paid her to keep silent, but perhaps she pushed too far. Holt's eyes flashed with anger. I've said all I'm going to say. I didn't kill her. My bag was there for emergencies, nothing more. Poirot turned to Lavinia, whose hands trembled in her lap. Madame Grey, your story of the shawl is curious. A blue silk shawl, seen by Thomas, yet not retrieved. And the letter to L, it suggests a confrontation. Were you the L Clara meant to meet? Lavinia gasped, her fan falling too. The floor. Me. No, Monsieur Poirot, I swear. I didn't meet her. I didn't write any letter. I was just nervous. That's why I left the theatre. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was relentless. He turned to Lady Beatrice, who sat rigid, her eyes fixed on him. Madame, you alone held the key to the library case. The crest of vengeance was your husband's treasure, its curse his obsession. Yet it was used to kill. Why? Beatrice's lips parted, but no sound came. She shook her head, her voice a whisper. I don't know, Hercule. I checked the case, it was locked. I never imagined. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Let us reconstruct the crime. The killer knew the play's timing, the blackout's duration. They replaced the prop knife with the crest of vengeance, taken from the library. They used the trapdoor to strike unseen, slipping beneath the stage in those 10 seconds of darkness. The blue silk, the grease, the lavender roller point to preparation, to knowledge of this manor and its secrets. But the motive, it is the heart of the matter. He paced, his voice rising. Clara Vernon was a blackmailer, yes, but her death was not merely to silence her. The dagger, with its curse, was a message. It was personal, tied to the legacy of Sir Reginald Ashford. And there is only one among us whose connection to that legacy is absolute. He turned to Lady Beatrice, his eyes locking with hers. Madame, you loved your husband, but his obsession with the dagger, with the lost codex, brought ruin. Clara, with her sharp mind, discovered this. She found the spare key hidden in Reginald's study and used it to unlock the case. She threatened to expose your family's secret debts, perhaps, or a scandal tied to the dagger's acquisition. You could not allow this, Nan. Beatrice's face crumpled, her hands rising to cover her mouth. Hercule, no, I couldn't. Poirot continued, his voice relentless. You altered Felix's script, ensuring Clara stood precisely where the trapdoor lay. You oiled the hinges, leaving the lavender scent of your perfume. You wore a blue silk shawl, a piece of which caught in the trapdoor. And during the blackout, you struck, using the crest of vengeance, to end her threat forever. The letter to L, it was a ruse, planted to mislead, for L stands for lady, does it? Not. The room was silent, the guests frozen. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, and she sank back in her chair. Reginald's legacy was all I had, she whispered. Clara found his letters, proof he'd bought the dagger illegally. She'd have ruined us, exposed everything. I had to protect his name. Poirot's voice softened, but his resolve was firm. You planned with care, madame, but the little grey cells, they see all. The grease on the switch, your perfume, the silk, these were your undoing. Inspector Hargreaves, who had entered quietly, stepped forward. Lady Ashford, I'll need you to come with us. Beatrice rose, her composure returning like a mask. I did it for Reginald, she said, her voice steady. I regret nothing. As the police led her away, the guests erupted in whispers, their shock palpable. Poirot stood alone, his cane tapping softly. The truth had been revealed, but it brought no joy. The human heart, he murmured, it is the greatest mystery of all. Chapter 9. The denouement. The air in Blackthorn Manor had grown heavy, as if the very walls exhaled the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded. The drawing room, once a stage for polite conversation and veiled tensions, now felt like a theatre. After the final curtain, its opulence dimmed by the shadow of truth. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, his small frame silhouetted against the mist-shrouded night, his grey eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moon. The guests, Sir Lionel Drake, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, Dr. Ernest Holt, and Felix Marwood remained. In their seats, their faces a gallery of shock, relief, and lingering unease. Lady Beatrice Ashford, the architect of Clara Vernon's murder, had been taken away by Inspector Hargreaves, her confession echoing in the silence she left behind. Yet for Poirot, the case was not fully closed. The little grey cells, ever vigilant, sought to ensure every thread was tied, every shadow dispelled. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to a faint glow, casting flickering shadows across the damask walls. The constable, standing guard at the door, maintained a stoic presence, while the distant sounds of police activity in the theatre had faded, leaving only the ticking of a grandfather clock to mark the passage of time. Poirot turned from the window, his cane tapping softly on the parquet floor, and faced the guests. His expression was serene, but his eyes held a quiet intensity, as if he was still sifting through the nuances of the crime. Mes amis, he began, his voice a steady beacon in the sombre room. The curtain has fallen on this tragic drama, and the truth has been revealed. Lady Beatrice Ashford, driven by her devotion to her late husband's legacy, took the life of Mademoiselle Clara Vernon. The crest of vengeance, a relic of curse and obsession, was her weapon, wielded with precision. Through the trapdoor during the blackout of Monsieur Marwood's play, the clues, the blue silk, the lavender oil, the grease, the letter to L, all pointed to her hand. Yet, as Hercule Poirot has learned, the truth is never simple. It is a tapestry woven of human passions, and we must understand its pattern, sir. Lionel Drake, his bluster subdued, cleared his throat. It's monstrous, he said, his voice hoarse. Beatrice, of all people, I never would have thought her capable. His hands, usually so animated, lay still in his lap, and Poirot noted the genuine shock in his eyes. Lavinia Gray, her fan forgotten, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Poor Beatrice, she murmured, to think she carried such a burden. And Clara was cruel, but to die like that. Her voice trembled, and Poirot saw in her a mix of pity and fear, as if the proximity of murder had shaken her carefully curated world. Dr. Ernest Holt, ever reserved, spoke softly. She protected her husband's name, but at what cost? I understand her fear of scandal, but this... He shook his head, his hands clasped tightly, and Poirot noted the relief in his posture, as if a weight had lifted with Beatrice's confession. Felix Marwood, still clutching his tattered script, looked at Poirot with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. You believed me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought they'd pin it on me, with Clara's blackmail. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot inclined his head, his smile gentle but tinged with melancholy. The innocent, Monsieur Marwood, must sometimes endure the shadow of suspicion. But the truth, it always finds the light. He moved to the center of the room, his cane a steady rhythm. Let us review the tapestry of this crime, for understanding brings closure. Lady Beatrice, she was driven by love and fear love for Sir Reginald's memory, fear of Clara's power to destroy it. The crest of vengeance, locked in the library, was not just a weapon but a symbol of the Ashford legacy, tainted by its illicit acquisition. Clara, with her sharp mind, discovered letters in Sir Reginald's study proof of his dealings with unscrupulous collectors. She used this, as she used her knowledge of Monsieur Marwood's plagiarism, Sir Lionel's debts, and Monsieur le Docteur's past, to extort silence and wealth. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The letter to L, found in Clara's room, was a clever misdirection. Beatrice planted it, knowing it would sow confusion, pointing to Lavinia or Lionel, but the blue silk scrap, caught in the trapdoor, was her error. She wore a shawl seen by Thomas, to conceal her movements as she slipped beneath the stage. The lavender oil, her perfume, lingered near the library case, betraying her presence when she took the dagger. The grease on the lighting switch, from her hurried adjustment to ensure the blackout's timing, sealed her fate. Lavinia's eyes widened. My shawl, you thought it was mine. Poirot's smile was reassuring. Non, madame. The silk was Beatrice's, a detail Thomas confirmed. Your absence during the blackout was suspicious, but you were merely lost in the corridors, as you said, a victim of this manor's labyrinth. Lavinia exhaled, her relief palpable. Sir Lionel, however, shifted uncomfortably, and me, you, suspected me because of that blasted production. Poirot nodded. Your motive was strong, Sir Lionel. Clara's failure cost you dearly, and your knowledge of the theatre's mechanisms made you a candidate. But your bluster, it is genuine, Nan. You are not a man of subtle plans. Sir Lionel grunted, a mix of indignation and relief. Dr. Holt, catching Poirot's eye, spoke up. And my bag, you thought I might have used a scalpel. A possibility, Monsieur Poirot said. Your silence, your past with Claret, suggested secrets. But the dagger, it was too specific. too tied to the ashpits. Felix, his voice, steadier now, asked, "What about the cigarette butt? You found it backstage. Was that Beatrice's too?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, that was a distraction, perhaps dropped by a stagehand or guest before the performance. It led nowhere." But it reminded Poirot to look beyond the obvious. Inspector Hargreaves entered, his face weary but satisfied. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "Lady Ashford's made a full statement. She's confessed to everything, taking the dagger, oiling the trapdoor, altering the script. She even admitted to planting the letter to throw us off. You've done fine work here." Poirot bowed slightly. "The little grey cells, Inspector, they do not rest until the truth is clear. But I thank you for your assistance." Hargreaves hesitated, then added, "We found the spare key, hidden in a hollowed-out book in Sir Reginald's study. She used it to access the dagger, just as you thought." Poirot nodded, his mind satisfied. The pieces had fallen into place, but the weight of the truth lingered. He addressed the guests once more. This crime was born of desperation, of a love twisted by fear. Lady Beatrice believed she protected her husband's name, but she destroyed her own. The human heart. It is a mystery greater than any play. As the guests began to disperse, their voices low and subdued, Poirot stepped back to the window, gazing out at the mist. The manor, with its Gothic towers and hidden secrets, seemed to sigh in the darkness. He thought of Clara, vibrant and flawed, and of Beatrice, whose loyalty had led to ruin. "The stage is empty now," he murmured, "but the echoes of this drama will linger." He turned to Felix, who lingered nearby. "Monsieur Marwood, your play. It was the backdrop for a crime, but it was not your fault. Write again, with courage." Felix nodded, a spark of resolve in his eyes. "I will, Monsieur Poirot. Thank you." As the police prepared to depart, Poirot gathered his coat and cane, his mind already turning to the journey back to London. The case was solved, the killer unmasked, but the cost of truth was always heavy. He stepped into the night, the mist swirling around him, and felt the familiar pang of melancholy. "The curtain falls," he said softly, "but the truth, it rises always." The end.